Hello and welcome to another mini tutorial. This particular one is at the request of quite a few of the supervisees that I work with who find themselves getting frustrated with clients, perhaps when they're not protecting children adequately. And of course they do their very best not to show the client that they're feeling heightened or reacting to something, but it's a topic that is in us all. So I've put together this PowerPoint, and this is a brief version of something that I'm doing as an interactive webinar. A deep dive into anger. My name is Kim Billington. We're going to look at understanding anger and its relationship to counter-transference. If anything comes up in the presentation, please attend to your self-care. Walk away, take a few grounding breaths, write things down in a journal, and seek supervision. This is the fact, the number one fact. It's everywhere, it's in us, it's in our clients, it's in children, and even the Dalai Lama, you will find, acknowledges that small things still get to him, but he doesn't hold on to it. He understands that these feelings of anger and bitterness and hate, that they're negative, and that if he keeps them inside, he's going to become unwell. So although they are useful, anger is a useful emotion, it tells us something. It tells us something's not quite right. We have to learn to manage it. And it does get easier as you get older. It's not something we can expect little children to sort out straight away. So even the Dalai Lama tunes in and notices that his giveaway is that his voice changes, it goes high. If you go to my website, there's a free PDF you can print. This has been quite helpful over the years. I normally ask people to select 3 or 4 of the words that are significant for them, the things that are leading up to an outburst of anger. I avoid using the word something that causes your anger, because my belief is that anger is a choice. For example, a child will express more anger at one parent than another. It's often a gendered choice. So it's everywhere. It's on the cricket field. If you look at this, well-respected cricketer from Perth, I think he is, he's called LBW, is it called out? He doesn't like that decision. And instead of walking off, he turns and starts to abuse the umpire. And look at his face on the right. He's no longer just frustrated or in denial. He's angry. And he's showing it and swearing and verbally abusing the umpire. Anger is everywhere, and often anger is a response to an injustice. So here on the left you'll see a story from America. These are headlines from this year, 2021. So a police officer dies, and when his wife tries to have him buried in the local cemetery, they say, oh no, sorry. This one's only for white people. Well, of course, the woman decides that she does not want her husband buried there after all. But in the meantime, the press get a hold of it. And of course, the board are very defensive and saying, oh, we weren't aware we still had this terrible policy. And then on the right, we've got an article about people who are really angry and disturbed about what's happening to the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. And I mean, that was the first 4,000 people arrested. So how many were on the streets if 4,000 were arrested? And that was only the first day of what is ongoing. So fear is everywhere, power is everywhere. And these are things that are connected with how we express our anger. So the people that were called by Sarah Ferguson from Four Corners a bunch of entitled white people they chose to use their anger at things not going how they wanted them to by stirring up fear. And how do they do that? They come as a powerful group. And there's the man pointing his finger on the right. And he knows the police are afraid. They've succeeded before they even get inside. One of the politicians inside kept his calm and was instructing his parliamentarians that he was with at the White House or Congress. And he said to them, look, don't leave and go to the basement until you've picked up your gas mask and you know how to put it on. And he was giving people like tutorials. How do you put this gas mask on? So he kept his calm. But if you look at this picture of him now, which was taken a few days later after the 6th of January, you will see a troubled man. So he's been affected by this, as a lot of them will. And his thoughts are that there's a bunch of people that don't want to share power. So anger is everywhere, power is everywhere, fear is everywhere. And you also, watching this, grew up in a family where there was some kind of power imbalance. One of your parents would have been a bit more, we used to say, strict. But what were their discipline practices? How were you treated? Who held the power at home? What were you exposed to? And if you were exposed to these things, imagine the clients that come to see you with their troubles, on top of what we all have as normal parenting inadequacies. None of us were parented in ways that were perfect. I like to think about, we all know we want to learn to live in a peaceful world with flow and be able to cope with changes. But this kind of thing isn't a given. You can't go to university and learn that. So we kind of begin with living a life with fear, unmet needs, with stress, and then we're afraid of losing our status or power and control. We put up boundaries in an attempt to protect ourselves. Boundaries are great, but it takes a while to understand that the boundaries don't have to include an anger response. Some people use anger to create the boundary. So, you ready to dive deep? Looking at the history, the origins of anger, a 2-year-old. The parcels keep arriving, but none of them are for the 2-year-old. They're for the baby. How do you feel? What happens to you when you go to your favourite coffee shop and the coffee's cold or bitter, or you get the wrong order? What happens to you? When you're a teenager or a child, reflect, write down on a piece of paper right now something that really brought out your fire. Write it down, you might forget it. And then after that, you'll think, that's because of so-and-so. I'm going to blame older sibling, parent, whatever, teacher. But when you point a finger in judgment, there are 3 pointing back at the self. So if you're hanging on to this resentment and anger, it, like the Dalai Lama said, it's going to create a health problem. Dr. Gabor Mate says the same thing. So I've got my ears open in counselling when someone says, oh, I get angry because so-and-so does this or doesn't do this. And I will say, well, if a neighbour came to your house and didn't wash up after the meal, would you still be angry with them? So people use these excuses of the different contexts, but people choose to get angry. There's a lovely story about the Buddha who was going to a village, and a man ran up and said, get out of here, don't come begging where we are, go back to your own place. And Buddha says, oh, may I ask you a question? The man says, yes, what is it? He said, if you bought a gift for a friend, but the friend said, oh, I don't need that, I don't want that, who would the gift belong to? And the man said, oh, probably me. And the Buddha said, that is right, and the anger belongs to you, I don't accept. what you were offering. So we're going to move into a look at what is anger, and then have a talk in part 2 about counter-transference. So most of you will have covered counter-transference in your training as counsellors, but sometimes it's only pictured as something not good. Whereas I have the opposite opinion. I think everything has purpose. We can learn from everything. So if you experience counter-transference and you were told in your training that it's not a good thing, you won't talk about it in supervision. You'll shut it down. You'll try and suppress this. But actually, it's giving information to you. Hamlet said, Shakespeare made Hamlet say, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So as you mature into your counselling work, begin to reflect on whether you're still using the black and white thinking. Oh, that's good, that's not good. Oh, anger's a bad thing. No. Anger is information, and we all experience it. We have a physical bodily response. There's some research that it's similar to anxiety. It's a secondary emotion, many people say. In other words, someone cuts you off in the traffic and your body and brain take an immediate response out of fear and slam the brakes. And then you beep the horn to show your anger. And we can take responsibility for our own anger, not just admitting fault, but making amends. And anger can be used as a smokescreen if someone doesn't want the other person to know that they're actually feeling insecure, or they don't want to be judged about something, how much they've been drinking maybe. And so they use anger to stop the person asking them how much they've drunk. Anger itself can become an addictive behavior, a pattern, where if it works, they'll keep using it, especially if they sense that it's protecting themselves. They're hanging on to power because of it. But when anger is repressed, it becomes a depression, and the immune system is recruited, depresses it to keep it down. Every vulnerable child has to choose, what shall I do to stay in this attachment relationship? It's not a conscious choice. But sometimes children learn to adapt and repress emotions to maintain the relationship with their primary adult. Again, have a look at some of Dr. Gabor Mate's YouTubes. Anger isn't either on or off. We're all on the spectrum. If you think about something that happened to you recently and your response stirred up and got your blood boiling, like I watched a 9-year-old girl be pepper sprayed by some police. I think there was like 8 police officers. She's pepper sprayed. Oh, that made my blood boil. It got too extreme for me. Some supervisees I was working with in a group last week, they were asking about anger, and I said, well, tell me about the opposite, your chill time, when you're in nirvana, what times of the week, what are you doing? And they talked about morning coffees, morning swims, Sunday dinner time, and they were all talking very nicely. And then I said, okay, what breaks into that? What can disturb that? Because these things are vulnerable. And then they wrote on the right of their words on the Zoom whiteboard what happens. And as they were then talking about them afterwards, their voices began to go higher. They began to express an emotional response. So one said, oh, I'm having my morning coffee, just give me 5 minutes. And then there's that neighbour's dog barking. So what happens is we keep pushing ourselves to these moments where we want peace and stillness. But life comes along, and our reaction to it is what the stress response is. And these counsellors acknowledged they were leaping up towards getting annoyed when something happened externally. Now you can have a look at this and go through each question, 1 to 10, quickly and give yourself a score. So if you're stuck in the traffic, what happens? What's the level of your anger response? Someone's not wearing a mask on the train in the pandemic, what's your response? Go through them quickly, write down your score, and then I want you to go back. So don't do it right now because we don't have time. I want you to go back and think to yourself, who, when they're stuck in traffic, doesn't have an anger response? So what if it's a taxi driver who's taking a politician somewhere and the fee will be paid no matter how long it takes? That taxi driver's sitting there quite happily. And what if that person not wearing a mask on the train actually has an exemption for some reason? Children understand all these emotions, and going to counselling, it helps them identify things. This 12-year-old says, anger arrives after I'm scared or worried. How insightful is that? They go on to say, sometimes when you're angry, you take it out on others and may hurt them, and then feel guilty and a bit sad. That's a 12-year-old having a bit of a reflection. Now, I won't have time to read through these because you can look at them, pause the video. 8 points. I would suggest you read them. And then you realise those 8 points are things happening in the physical body. So when you say or think to your client, oh, just calm down. This is a very powerful thing that's happening in the client's body or in your body. How do you just calm down? How do you just stop a tornado? We do need to gather adult-friendly resources, things that were comfortable to show adults that might work for them. We can ask them what's helpful. We can use an image like the Geology of Anger. You find something that works for you. Children and young people might want to draw their own. And then again, in your own time afterwards, have a look and choose 3 emotions you know sometimes come up for you in a session around anger. Dr. David Hanscom says anger and anxiety are the same entity. And there's your body's attempt to increase your efforts to regain control. He says anger is anxiety with a chemical kick. So if you read those 8 points, you will know what the chemical kick he's talking about is. And we all are striving to control so that we have a feeling of calm, we have a feeling of nirvana. And then, of course, we're vulnerable because life isn't like that. All right, we'll stop there and we'll return for part 2 afterwards. Thank you.